Even without the rune word Infinity, an OrbWall Sorceress can farm any level 85 area in D2R. While Blizzard builds might have dominated the launch, there may be a new build in town for the first ladder reset. Players are discovering that the Frozen Orb Firewall Sorceress is capable of farming difficult areas without needing the best gear. In this video, I'm going to show you my OrbWall build that I've been using for magic finding on stream, along with some helpful tips as to how to min-max your damage. Let's dive in. The OrbWall Sorceress uses Frozen Orb as her main attack to clear large groups of monsters, and because of the insane damage on Firewall, she uses that skill to clear up immune monsters and quickly dispose of bosses. While this version of the Sorceress that I'll show you today is our current one with items that we've acquired through doing runs, you should know that we started out with this build at a far lower level with far worse gear. The sheer power of this build comes from the skill distribution, so let's take a look at that first. Orb is going to be one of our main attacks, so what we're going to do is maximize Frozen Orb along with its synergy Ice Bolt. So both of these are going to have base 20 points into them, and then you're going to move on to the next skill. The next skill is Cold Mastery. I would highly suggest getting this to -130 to -135 to enemy cold resist. You're going to see the biggest return on your cold damage when you do that. As for lightning spells, we're just going to put one hard point into Teleport, which requires one hard point into Telekinesis. Two very useful skills in this build. And then the Fire Spells tab is where this gets interesting and where we have an opportunity to maximize the damage that we get from Firewall, even though we don't commit a lot of our points to that skill or its synergies. I want to give a big shout out to Nyx for taking the time to figure this out. Thank you so much for figuring out the distribution here. And because of his hard work on this, let me share his findings with you. What we're going to want to do is put 20 hard points into Firewall. This is going to be technically our secondary attack, but it's going to feel like a dominant attack whenever you use it. It hits very hard and just melts monsters very quickly. So what we'll do is put 20 base points into that. And then here's where the Juck Trickery comes into play. The other two important skills on this tab are Warmth and Fire Mastery. You're going to want to distribute your points between Warmth and Fire Mastery, but you're going to want to do it in a specific way. As you level up, or if you're respecking your build, basically what you want to do is try to keep Fire Mastery 3 levels higher than your Warmth. So with this particular build, we are level 92, and we have 10 base points into Warmth and 13 base points into Fire Mastery. After many different calculations, Nyx figured out that this is the best way throughout this build to maximize the damage output from Firewall, and he was right. Before this, I was distributing my points evenly between Firewall, Warmth, and Fire Mastery. After I did it this way, we got about 2,500 more Firewall damage by doing it this way. You can see once we get battle ordered up here that our Firewall damage output is 15 to 16k. Now that's pretty insane when you figure that that's pretty comparable to what we were nuking bosses with in our Firewall boss killer build. And while we're on the page, I'll show you the damage that we do from Frozen Orb. It's about 700 damage per orb, but it's a little misleading. Frozen Orb throws out a bunch of fire bolts when you launch it, and depending on how you've aimed it, how directly you hit your target actually matters as to how much damage you do as well. You might notice that we have a lot of points into Dexterity. That is because with this build, looks like I missed some points here when I leveled up, but ideally we actually want 75% block. This is going to be a max block build. We have just enough points into strength to wear our items, and the rest of our points go straight into vitality. And the reason I like to have a high block percent with this build is because we're giving up a lot of skill distribution that most Sorcs would put into Energy Shield. Instead, we're putting that into 2 different skills. While it's okay to use spirits or what have you and just dodge damage and try not to get hit, I like my PVM characters to be absolute tanks so that if I accidentally telly into a mob, I'm not just straight dead. That being said, let's take a look at the gear. The inventory is really nothing special. It's just charms that I've come across along the way. Ideally, we would probably want some cold damage or cold skills grand charms, but we just kind of kept the fire skillers that we had from our boss killing build, and that's basically the only good charms that we have in our inventory. Ideally, to min-max this build, you're probably going to want to get as many cold skill charms in your inventory as you can. Doing so will allow you to bump up your cold mastery without having to put as many hard points into it, and that will give you more points to spend on Firewall synergy, essentially bumping up the damage output from both skills. So that's why it's important to have cold skill charms in your inventory instead. Additionally, we're going to be doing a lot of our killing with Frozen Orb. As for the weapon, we have Heart of the Oak Flail. I would highly suggest having at least 105% faster cast on this build, and Heart of the Oak is a very good way to get you there. We have Shaco for the helm, we have Mars for the amulet, we have Skin of the Viper Magi for the armor. All of these items that have the plus to skills on them will help us with what we have on the swap. We have a Call to Arms with an extremely low roll on battle orders on our swap, but with all of these plus to skill items, it will bump up the life boost that we get from that. And then the shield that I use for max block is Storm Shield. While Sanctuary is also a fine choice, and also you could use Gurk's Pavis for some added damage reduction and resistances, I like Storm Shield when we don't have Energy Shield active, because a lot of times when you have max block and you teleport into a mob, you need some added protection. And if you don't have Energy Shield and much of that damage can't be absorbed to your mana, it's all going straight to your life. So you want to reduce as much of it as possible in the most dangerous situations. So that's why for this build in particular right here, instead of going Sanctuary, I actually choose Storm Shield. From there we have dual SOJs, and we have an Arachnid's Mesh for the belt. Our gloves are Mage Fists, and as you can see with all of these items, this build obtains 110% faster cast rate, and that is just 5% above where you ideally want to be. The reason you want to be that high is because you want to be able to teleport away from things very quickly. We don't have ES, so if you get caught in a mob, you will have quite a bit of survivability with max block and damage reduction, but you still want to be able to hit the appropriate frames to teleport out of that mob that you've found yourself in as quickly as you can. It can also help if you use a certain strategy, which I'll show you in a moment. And the rare boots are something that we found in one of our Mephisto run videos that we put up, and these just have a nice boost to lightning and fire res, and some added magic find there as well. If you can get your hands on a Sorceress Torch, these things can go a long way in the build as well. So speaking of strategy and what we do, let me just show you some runs. So right now we're in the Chaos Sanctuary, and the strategy that I like to use for this is I like to teleport in and kill the unique mobs. You'll see that a lot of these monsters are immune to cold or immune to fire. Sometimes they're immune to both. When that happens, I like to pin them on the wall with telekinesis and let Emilio take care of them. But for the most part, I teleport through and I look for boss packs, because that is what's going to give us the best chance of dropping some of the GG items. I like to farm Chaos Sanctuary because of the high % chance that it has to drop runes. Now, what you'll do is sometimes when you teleport into a mob, you'll see that, like, oh man, we could be in some trouble here. Notice how I'm using Glacial Spike to freeze the mob. That can give you the window that you need to freeze the monsters that are immediately around you and teleport away. It's also a good way to sort of control the crowd when you're plowing through the Chaos Sanctuary. Maybe your mercenary wants to get involved too. It's just a really good way to halt the progress of a mob of monsters while you finish them off with Frozen Orb and or Firewall, depending on their immunities. So we'll go up to Desace here, and you see this is a pretty dangerous monster pack right here, but we're just gonna use Glacial Spike and try to clean them up. We're gonna drop a Firewall on Desace when we get the opportunity, and down he goes. You'll see that these some of these mages are immune to cold. That's fine. We can just hit them at quite a long range with Firewall. Once we're done there, another very dangerous monster pack is the Infector of Souls and all of his goons down here. Same strategy. What we're gonna do is just try to freeze the monster packs here, and if by chance he is cold and fire immune, we're just gonna pull the same strategy that we do for every other monster that we see that happens to be like this. We're just gonna sit here, we're gonna dump all of the monsters around him, and then we're gonna let Emilio do his work. As far as the bosses go, you'll see that the damage output from Firewall still melts these bosses very quickly. Emilio didn't survive, but you can see that even though this is sort of our secondary skill, I would still consider it a main skill. It really just annihilates bosses extremely quickly. So that's how the build does in Chaos. And another very dangerous level 85 area is the Throne of Destruction. The way that we're going to handle this right here is just like we did the Chaos Sanctuary. We're going to launch Glacial Spike into mobs of monsters. There are going to be cold immunes down here, but we're just going to cook them with Firewall. From there, if we do happen to run into monsters again that are immune to both, usually we just pin them down with telekinesis and let Emilio just do his work. I've noticed that on Wave 2, Firewall cooks most of these monsters a lot faster than Orb, even though they're kind of weak to both. And then also you can just kind of name lock the skeletons and drop Firewall on them when it's convenient. Now, as you get into waves 3, 4, and 5, technically a Hammerdin could possibly clear these faster. But a lot of times for a build like that, you're going to need Enigma. You're going to need, you know, sort of the end game gear that a lot of people seek. And the point of this build right here is to help you get that gear as early as possible. On wave 4 here, these guys have a very high fire resistance, but that's fine. Orb just usually rips them right up pretty good. The next wave is the Act 5, or the Minions of Destruction monsters here. The Frozen Orb takes care of these guys very easily as well. They are immune to fire, and it is possible that Lister the Tormentor does spawn as immune to both. We treat him just like any monster that we would in, say, the Chaos Sanctuary. And we're going to clear all the other minions. We're going to pin him down and let Emilio do his work. This might be a good time to show off what Emilio is using for gear. He's using an Ethereal Insight Colossus Fulge. He's using Duriel's Shell. I like that for Cannot Be Frozen because, as you see, there are some instances where he's kind of responsible for cleaning up the monster. In those cases, it just works a lot faster if he's not frozen. I do like having that ability on these items. And his mask is in Dariel's Visage here. We put a Ral rune in that to help boost up or take care of the negative fire resist that comes inherent on this helm. From here, let's move into Baal, and I'll show you how quickly this Sorc can take care of Baal. We are going to use the same skill that we did with Diablo. We're just going to use Firewall. Once Baal sits in this Firewall and cooks in it, you'll see that he drops pretty quickly. Also, with this max block build, it makes it so you can sort of take the same approach as our boss killer Firewall build and just get obnoxiously close to the boss. Some bosses like Baal like to move around a lot, so it's good to be able to stand right up close to them and give them the option to physically hit you, as it will keep them in the same spot for longer. Oh, we got some pretty cool stuff here. We got Frostwind. We got an Ethereal Frostwind. Sick. I don't think I've ever found one of those. This thing's, it's not very useful, but it's ethereal. Cool. So that's the basic build, and this is how it works. Let me know what you think of this build down in the comments if you've tried it out. Maybe you've already discovered the power of this build, and let me know if you will be using it on the ladder reset when it comes for Diablo 2 Resurrected. Thank you so much for watching this video. I'll catch you in the next one.